Well, good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to the non-applicable clauses, permissible exclusions, exemptions presentation. My name is Joseph Krolikowski. I am the QMS Program Manager and a member of the Executive Committee for Perry Johnson Registrars. Couple of notes for everyone. All of our participants today are on mute. But we absolutely want to take your questions, so please utilize the question portion of the dashboard. I will address your questions at the end of our presentation. One of the more common questions that we get is whether or not copies of today's presentation will be made available. The answer to that is yes. Copies will be made available shortly after we're finished. You can download them direct from our website. And if you'd like to rewatch this webinar, complete with voiceover, that will also be possible. You just click the link for previously recorded webinars. Our topics for today, we're going to be discussing non-applicable clauses. That is the terminology that's used in ISO 9001-2015. We're going to have a little bit of discussion on some of the high-level requirements that apply to this issue. We're going to dig a bit into the concept of outsourcing. Now, this is a concept that is very pertinent to this issue of non-applicable clauses. We'll have a little bit of a review of the 9001-2008 aspects on these concepts, kind of a historical bit of context. We'll dig into the 2015 9001 requirements pertaining to outsourcing, have a little bit of a discussion on the aspects of a limited scope, a few concluding remarks, and then your questions. Just a special note, for purposes of our presentation today, we will be examining these concepts as they are addressed in the ISO 9001-2015 standard. Now, these concepts appear in many other standards. We see them in AS 9100, IATF 16949, and others. But most of the time, there are going to be sector-specific requirements in those cases. We do have webinars on all three of those standards and many other standards, so we definitely invite you to visit our website for further information. If you've got a question related to a standard like AS 9100 or IATF 16949 and non-applicable clauses therein, you can definitely address that question to your auditor or a member of the PJR Executive Committee. So let's begin with what are non-applicable clauses. Now, that terminology comes from ISO 9001-2015, clause 4.3. And here's the extract of the standard where it is actually mentioned. It states that the organization's scope shall state the types of products and services that are covered and shall provide justification for any requirement of the international standard, in other words, ISO 9001-2015, that the organization has determined is not applicable to the scope of its quality management system. Now, if you read a little bit further in clause 4.3, it states that the scope, which we now understand as including the details and justification for the non-applicable clauses, has to be maintained as documented information. In other words, you have to have it officially stated. This can be, of course, within the context of a quality manual, should you choose to have one, a scope document, something along those lines. Now, in terms of how this was approached in the 2008 version of ISO 9001, this was addressed through the idea of permissible exclusions. If we go back to the 2000 version, even of ISO 9001, this was the concept that was used. And in the older standard, it read as follows: where any requirement of this international standard cannot be applied due to the nature of the organization and its product, it can be considered for exclusion. Now, in 422A, in that older standard, it stated that your exclusions and the justifications therein had to be documented within a quality manual. The quality manual, of course, was mandatory under the 2008 version. It is no longer mandatory in 2015. So for my presentation today, I'm going to choose to refer to these phrases, permissible exclusions and non-applicable clauses. I'm going to refer to these things collectively under the term exemptions. I think exemptions is an easily understood term, and it gets the point across. So for the balance of the presentation, we will be referring to these as exemptions. So let's break this down and try to understand exactly what's going on here. As you probably noticed, ISO 9001-2008 and ISO 9001-2015 essentially say the same thing when it comes to exemptions. For an exemption to truly be justified, it has to be something that is not part of the quality management system as defined by the scope. It can't just be a case of it's something you don't feel like having the auditor look at. That's not acceptable. It has to be something that falls outside of the scope. So let's dig a little deeper and get a better sense of how we can understand that requirement. Now, first of all, it's important to understand that there are a number of high-level requirements. Now, some of these are a little dated at this point, but all of them are relevant in terms of understanding how the requirements are understood and how they're phrased. So we're going to be looking at guidance from the TC 176 committee. These are the folks that wrote ISO 9001, both in its 2008 and 2015 revisions. We'll be looking at a particularly helpful publication from the ISO 9001 Auditing Practices Group, or APG. This is a joint effort representing both the ISO and the IAF, the International Accreditation Forum. We'll be looking at some further content within ISO 9001-2015 itself, both auditable and guidance verbiage. And in addition, I'll be referring in at least one place to the Technical Standard 9002. This is the Quality Management Systems guidelines for the application of ISO 9001-2015. This is a clause-by-clause guidance document. So we're bringing quite a bit of helpful guidance to bear here. I'd like to start with the what I refer to as the TC 176 committee position papers. Now, this is a bit more historical context. Way back in October 2008, shortly after the ISO 9001-2008 standard was published, the committee issued two officially binding guidance documents. Now, these were entitled Guidance on ISO 9001-2008, Subclause 1.2, Application. 524R6 was the number officially for that, and Guidance on Outsourced Processes. This was guidance document 630R3. Now, those two papers included a requirement that at the time was considered rather controversial. Those two guidance documents together provided numerous permutations pertaining to exemptions, most of which were well understood, but there was one item in particular that stood out at the time as controversial. So let's start with 524R6, where it stated that examples of situations where conformity to ISO 9001-2008 should not be claimed include those situations where an organization excludes a requirement on the basis that the activity has been outsourced. Now, this is even more strongly stated in the guidance document 630R3. The intent of clause 4.1 of ISO 9001-2008 is to emphasize that when an organization chooses to outsource, whether permanently or temporarily, a process that affects product conformity with requirements, it cannot simply ignore this process nor exclude it from the quality management system. So in other words, any exemption that was rooted in outsourcing is not an acceptable exemption. and it should result in a nonconformance during the audit. Now, this is the committee that wrote the standard saying this. There is simply no getting around it. Which brings up the obvious elephant in the room, and that is design. For many years, PJR and probably every other certification body has had clients that claimed exemption from design and development on the basis that designs were being provided by a parent company or a sister company. Now, those exemptions are potentially not appropriate and should not have been automatically accepted. Now, we'll be giving some clarification on this in a few slides. But understand that there are two basic justifications for an exemption of design and development requirements. Number one, if you are receiving a complete product design from your customers, that's obvious. Or if you do not manufacture products based on a product design, if you operate a warehouse, a distributorship, if you're a service company and so forth, then it is also conceivable that you would not have any process that has anything to do with product design. Now, there is a third option that we'll be exploring in just a few slides. Now, the most common response that we get from our auditors and our clients on this is frustration and asking, well, how can PJR audit something that I don't do? If I don't have design in my building, how can you possibly call me design and audit design? Well, what you have to remember is that we're not auditing the actual design activity itself or whatever activity is being outsourced. We are auditing the outsourcing controls that are being applied. So this brings us now to our next topic. What is outsourcing? So our understanding of this concept begins with a review of the definition for outsourcing. And for this, we refer to the ISO 9000 or Fundamentals and Vocabulary document. And it defines outsourcing as making an arrangement where an external organization performs part of the organization's function or process. In other words, they become part of your quality management system. That's really the simplest way to understand it. Now, that phrase and the wording therein is very important. It states that it is an organization's function or process. And they did that deliberately. It means that the organization still has ownership of the function, still has ownership of the process, even if it isn't performed in their facility. Now that gets further emphasized in the note that appears right after the official definition. Again, this is taken from the ISO 9000 document, where it states that an external organization is outside of the scope of the management system, but the function or process is within the scope. So again, if you are outsourcing design, the external organization that's providing the design, absolutely, they're outside of your scope, but what they're doing for you is within your scope, based on the definition for outsource from the ISO 9000 document. So what are some common examples of outsourced processes? Now, I've prepared a list here, and I've paired each one with the representative clause from ISO 9001:2015. Now, these are from all different areas. As you can see, most of these are rooted in Section 8 of the standard. We have purchasing, manufacturing, design, obviously, customer service. We've got a couple from Section 7, calibration or verification of measurement devices. That's probably the most common outsourced activity. Training, certification of personnel, and so forth. So lots of different examples of potential, outsourced processes. So where was outsourcing discussed in the ISO 9001:2008 standard? Well, for that we refer to Section 4.1, where it stated that where an organization chooses to outsource any process that affects product conformity to requirements, the organization shall ensure control over such processes. And that comes from section 4.1. Now in 2015, there are actually two references, one that comes from the auditable portion and one from the guidance portion. The organization shall ensure that externally provided processes, products and services conform to requirements. And then if we refer to Annex A8, it states that all forms of externally provided processes, products, and services are addressed in section 8.4, whether through an arrangement with an associate company or outsourcing processes to an external provider. So the idea here was that in the 2008 version of the standard, we had suppliers and we had folks that we outsourced to, and these were addressed in different parts of the standard. Well, now in ISO 9001-2015, all of these concepts have been merged under the common header externally provided, external providers, and all of those requirements are relegated to section 8.4. Now, as mentioned, there are several other important publications. I mentioned the 9002 guidance standard. Here's what it has to say about this requirement. It says that external providers could include the organization's corporate headquarters, associate companies, suppliers, or someone to whom the organization has outsourced a process. The Auditing Practices Group, the APG, also weighed in on this issue on their document Scope of ISO 9001, where it states that outsourcing is to be considered as an input to the development of an organization's scope. So remember, when we audit an outsourced activity, we're not auditing the actual activity itself, but we are rather confirming that appropriate controls have been established. So what kind of controls do they mean? What are we talking about controls? Well, think in terms of how you communicate with anyone that is outside of your organization to whom you are assigning a task. What are the kinds of things that you would use to control that task? You know, some of these are very obvious. You would write these things up into a contract. You might issue a purchase order. You might issue instructions via email. You might have terms and conditions spelled out on your website. You might go to the external provider and perform an audit. You might provide them with a work instruction. You might require that they maintain a management system certification such as ISO 9001. All of these or combinations of these are going to be acceptable for showing that you are controlling the outsourced activity. So for example, let's say we have a company that chooses to outsource 100% of their calibration or verification activity to a calibration laboratory. So what's the auditor going to be looking at? They might look at the contract that's issued to the calibration lab. They will most certainly look at the calibration records that are issued by the calibration lab. And they'll definitely be looking at the gauge labeling that's been applied by the calibration lab. Now, you'll note that none of that equivocates to a review of the actual calibration verification activity. And in this scenario, none of the clauses from ISO 9001 that pertain to calibration or verification would be claimed as an exemption. So all of the requirements from 715 would apply, and the auditor would review the interface with the external provider, both what goes out communication-wise and what comes back communication-wise. Now, an important thing that I'd like to share with you, part of what we do when we review an audit package here at Perry Johnson headquarters, and we've instructed our auditors to do this as well, is to review the client's website. We do this as a regular part of the audit process or the audit review process. And you have to remember, a website is admissible as evidence in the context of an audit. And what are we looking for? Well, we're looking for a couple of key things. Does it appropriately reflect what your scope is? And by chance, does it reference design activity? And you have been classified as no design. Now, if we find that you are indicating you provide design on the website and you are classed as no design, the explanation that we get usually falls into one of a couple of categories. We might be told that the corporate provides the designs. Well, we've learned now that that isn't acceptable for the arrangement to be no design in that circumstances. Sometimes we're told that the situation is we don't provide design services, we just want to attract potential customers by saying that we do. Certainly PJR understands the desire to grow your business. Unfortunately, this arrangement isn't acceptable either. Your website and design classification have to be aligned with each other. Once in a while, we'll also get the response that you did design your products, but they are all legacy products. Now, in those situations, we definitely have to be very careful in how we proceed. We need to make sure that there is absolutely no evidence of design activity, whether it be design changes or something along those lines, and that's going to have to be carried out over a series of audits before we can consider a change in classification. Now, one other possibility for exemptions that we see from time to time is an exemption rooted in a limited scope. Now, most of the clients that we have, they intend for their entire operation to be included in their certification. In other words, all the things they do, all of their products, all of their production, everything in the building. We do, from time to time, have a client that will come to us and say that they have just a limited number of things that they want included, whether that be for financial reasons or for other possible motivations. Now, where that is the case, it is possible that a portion of the ISO 9001 standard might be considered for exemption that would not have been possible in a full scope situation. So let's look at an example of this. Let's say that we have an organization that manufactures clothing for industrial and commercial markets. Now, for purposes of this example, we're going to presume that there are two primary product lines: leather goods, which we'll call industrial applications, and polyester goods for commercial applications. Now, you may recall that ISO 9001-2015 includes warranty provisions in Section 855. Now, in our example here, let's assume that the organization offers warranty returns on their commercial products, but not on their industrial products. Now, if the company is seeking ISO 9001 certification for only their industrial product line, it is possible that they'll be able to claim a full or partial exemption from Section 8.5.5 based on what is included in the scope and what is not. So what happens if an inappropriate item is being claimed as an exemption? Now, the most appropriate result of this is going to be a nonconformance. Now, we looked earlier at what the probable clause numbers are going to be to cite. Now, if you receive a nonconformance in the context of an audit that you do not agree with, we definitely want you to utilize our dispute process. We have a dispute procedure. It's called Pro 10. It can be downloaded at any time from the PJR website. If you go to www.pjr.com, go to the bottom of the page and click Registration Document Download, you will find a copy of Pro 10 that you can download and review. And again, that right is made available for any audit. If you are going to file a dispute, it has to be done within 15 days of the audit's conclusion. So to bring this back to design, back in 2017, we rolled out a new certification option for clients that were receiving some or all of their product designs from a parent or affiliate company. Now that option is referred to as full design outsourced. And we view full design outsourced as a nice option for those companies that are receiving product designs from a parent company or an affiliate company. So here's what happens if you are classified as full design outsourced. Audit time is going to be potentially calculated in the same manner that we currently use for those clients where it is no design. We'll be giving a clarification on that in the next couple of slides. If you are classed as full design outsourced, this means that all parts of section 8.3, that's the design portion of the standard, have to be included in your quality management system. They cannot be claimed as exemptions. And your certificate has to reflect that design is part of your scope. So again, you will potentially see a reduction in audit time. You'll not be able to claim any part of section 8.3 is not applicable, and your scope statement has to reference the design activity, same as it would if you were traditional full design. Now, when we rolled out our new full design outsourced classification option, we reached out to the ANAB to make sure that we had their blessing on this direction that we were taking with our system. Now, the ANAB generally indicated that they felt what we were doing was appropriate, but they emphasized that we have to, through our audit process, make sure that controls are being applied to anything that is outsourced, and that those controls have to be included in the audit process. Now, I'm quoting directly from ANAB's mandate here. They stated that the complexity, activities, and risks that are present due to an outsourced provider of products, processes, or services needs to be controlled and confirmed, as discussed in 9001-2015, Section 8.4. And they went on to say that Section 8.4 has many requirements that apply to an organization and have to be confirmed or evaluated by the certification body when certifying an organization with outsourced products, processes, or services. The ANAB also indicated that they strongly object to any automatic audit time reductions regarding product design status, again quoting them directly here. In all cases, the certification body is required to clearly, effectively, and realistically justify and document justifications for any adjustment, whether it be an increase or decrease, in audit time from the established IAF MD5 audit day tables. IAF MD5, you may note, is a public domain document. If you've ever wondered where audit time comes from, you can Google IAF MD5 and download a copy of that document for yourself. So in other words, we cannot be expected to initially reduce audit time for a classification of full design outsourced. If you are transitioning from full design to full design outsourced, we need to make sure that an on-site auditor has provided us with some assurance that the controls that are being applied to outsourced processes are mature, highly effective, and can be assessed with no added audit time. So we now have 4 classification options pertaining to your design status. So let's go ahead and review those options over the next several slides. The first option, of course, is full design. Any organization that is responsible for the design of at least one of the products that they manufacture would be classed as full design. All sections of Clause 8.3 are applicable for companies classified in this manner. The second option, of course, is no design. Any organization that receives all designs from their customers or otherwise does not interact with product designs, like we talked about earlier, warehouses, staffing companies, etc. In those situations, all portions of Clause 8.3 would be claimed as not applicable. for companies that are classified in this manner. Now, as a special note, if you receive your product designs from a parent or affiliate company, but you don't have any responsibility for product design, and in particular, if you don't advertise or otherwise represent that you are responsible for any product design activity, it is possible in that situation that you may also qualify for classification as no design. That is per the ANAB, and we take those situations on a case-by-case basis. A third option that we have that is not used a whole lot is partial design. And this is reserved for an organization that provides technical input, review, verification, or other design services to their client, but does not typically have responsibility for final design approval. In this situation, portions of Clause 8.3 are claimed as not applicable, but not all of 8.3. And the appropriate clauses to include are going to vary from case to case depending on what aspect of design you are providing. And then, of course, we have the newest option, and that is full design outsourced. And this is an organization that receives all or some of its product designs from parent or affiliate companies or subcontractors, and advertises or otherwise represents that they are responsible for product design activity. Any full design outsourced company would have all parts of Section 8.3 as applicable in their quality management system. They cannot be excluded. So in conclusion, PJR wants to ensure that our audit process is value added for our clients and addresses all applicable requirements. And we want to ensure that all exemptions are justified. This is something that's looked at for every audit. We want to make sure that we are all on the same page on this topic, on this very important topic. I'd like to invite you to tune in to one of our other webinars. We have ISO 9001:2015, an introduction to the world's most popular standard. That webinar made its debut a few months ago. It is a structured introduction to ISO 9001:2015 and provides some insight on its many key concepts. We have a special presentation on statutory and regulatory requirements, and we have presentations on a lot of other topics: process mapping, stage 1 audits, and many of the other popular international management system standards. We like to keep in touch with our clients, and the best way for us to do that is through, if you opt in at pjr.com. If you go to the bottom of the page, enter your email address and click subscribe, you'll be automatically opted in for updates, news updates, new webinars, and so forth. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and unlock the question portion of the dashboard here if anyone has questions for us today. Okay. Brenda Bonpatra asks, in partial design, is it that the portions designed by the organization is to be audited? Okay, I was trying to bring up the whole question here. Yeah, the intent with partial design is that we are going to examine whatever that activity is. If you're providing design counsel or review services or verification services, and try to give some sense of how you are interfacing with your customers and so forth. That's how that would be approached. Okay. Okay. Jennifer Dunstan is asking if we can provide a list of additional course information. Jennifer, your very best bet on what we've got upcoming as far as webinars, would be to go to our website at pgr.com and then follow the links for training and webinars. You can find all of the upcoming webinars listed out there. Any other questions today? Thank you for your compliments. Okay, everyone have a great day. And we have a follow-up question here. In regards to a separate division that performs design exempt from the scope, can we define the inputs and outputs of what our group perform? Yes, yeah. In that situation, if you have a division that performs design, the way to understand it is this. This is a question from Cheryl Hersa. If it is design that is performed for product that is being manufactured under your quality management system, you don't have a choice. It has to be included. If it is design that is being performed for a product that is outside of your scope, in other words, it has nothing to do with what is within the scope, then yes, it is possible it is possible for design to be exempted in that circumstance. Okay. Jennifer, let me jump back a couple of slides for you here. There you go. Okay. Okay, Julie Johnson asks, how would providing suggestions to customers about their product design be reviewed or considered? Julie, in that situation, we would most likely class you as partial design. That arrangement would be considered partial design. And we would look to see, how do you interface with your customer? How do you communicate with your customer on that particular item? And it might even be a situation where you are providing design assistance or advice occasionally. It doesn't even need to be a regular part of your quality management system. We would look at email traffic, or perhaps you take the product design and make official notations on it. Maybe you have a joint meeting with your customer and there's an agreement that's drawn up as a result. ISO is not going to be prescriptive in terms of how that would be approached. We are simply going to confirm that there is a process in place and that it's being effectively followed. Okay. Tomas Villanueva asks, is it valid or useful to exempt services if we are only producing products? Great question. And it's actually, Tomas, a throwback to the older versions of the standard. The old understanding used to be that you had to specifically identify if there were services provided on products. We had production and we had service. That is actually really no longer an issue. Products and services are so thoroughly blended in the 2015 version of the standard. Every phrase where you see products, it reads products and services. So to call out that you don't provide service or don't provide service on your product line specifically is really no longer a concern because those two requirements have been so thoroughly blended. Any other questions today? Okay, we have a question from Heidi Adam. If a distributor for a product is outsourcing for drawings of the room the product is to be put in, can we exempt? Okay, so if I'm understanding what you're asking me, you have a special room put together for storage of the product. Your scope is distribution of the product, and you're outsourcing a contractor to have a special room built for storage of the product. In that circumstance, based on what's in the scope, I think the, X-ray equipment room. Heidi, I think in that situation, the correct classification would be no design. Because your scope is distribution, not room building. Any other questions today? Well, you're all quite welcome. I'm glad to help. Anything further? Okay, everyone have a great day, and thank you for your time.